Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laura Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is about 6 minutes after 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, and Wednesday morning, February the 16th, and it took me an hour to get into my chat room here this morning, and into my show, actually. I wasn't able to bring the Blog Talk Radio site up on the internet, and it took me forever to get in. So sorry about that, anybody who's tuning in and listening. And the chat room's not open yet, but I want to continue talking about the issues of attachment and bonding. So hopefully I'm streaming properly and you can hear me. And we'll just get right into this. I didn't want to miss my show this morning. And if I have to, I have to. But it's kind of strange how I had to get in here. I kind of had to get in through a link rather than going through the internet. So it's kind of strange. But glad to be able to do these shows. You know, I'm not a counselor or therapist or anything like that. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own Blog Talk shows. And mainly because I really, I want to speak out against child abuse and stand up for children's rights, and also just to be another voice for survivors out here. So that's why I'm doing these shows, and you have to listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about abuse, and the topics of abuse are very sensitive. A lot of this type of information, very sensitive. So you have to be aware of what you're listening to, whether or not it will. Everyone has to listen at their own discretion. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show, because I believe that children should be protected at all times. And so, I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we work, to promote education and awareness regarding the issues of child abuse and child abuse prevention. So you need to learn how to keep yourself safe when you're online. So anybody under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show, and mainly because there's a lot of adult content, and I don't know how young the people are who are listening to my show. So just make sure you have an adult listen to the show with you, like a parent or caregiver who can help you make that decision whether you should be listening or not. So yesterday we left off just talking about the child, the bonding and attachment in maltreated children, consequences of emotional neglect in childhood. And this is from the Child Trauma Academy, www.childtraumaacademy.org. And this particular PDF was written by Bruce D. Perry, MD, PhD. And we're about halfway through the article here. It's about a 10-page PDF. He's talking about what is, proper bonding and attachment, and what happens when children, don't get that opportunity to have a proper attachment and good bonding with especially maternal bonding, but with the whole bonding issue with both parents. So he's talking about this, and it's kind of interesting. I like to look at this information because I know when I was born it was kind of nobody was all that happy, you know what I mean? I didn't come into the world and people were standing around going, oh yay, nobody was actually expecting me to live, really, because I was born actually pre-me. They had to take me out early, and then when my mom was in a coma when I was born, so she went into a coma, and I was in an incubator for a while. Then I went home, and things were just not good in my home, and I just know that the environment would have been very, very stressful because of the situation that was going on in the home at the time. So I think, well, I probably missed out on some bonding and some of that proper bonding with my mother, and I know for sure. When I started to actually become cognitive and have these memories, my earliest memories of my mother are not good ones, not kind ones, So I know I missed out on a lot of that stuff, and I think that it's so important. So many people have, I'm sure, and it's and it really is necessary, I guess, that if we didn't get that, we need to learn how to kind of go back and get some of that stuff ourselves through the different ways that we can do that, to learn how to self-soothe, how to self-nurture, how to love ourselves, and how to take care of ourselves, because it's so important. If we missed out on that, many times people don't get that as children, and then don't know how to do it later on in life. There's really great information out there all over the web, especially like the Child Abuse Survivor Monument. Michael C. Irving has a great website. He's a psychotherapist. He's also a survivor, and he has a great website called the Child Abuse Survivor Monument, and it's an awesome website. If you go to the self-care links under adult survivors self-care, there's all kinds of information on there about how people like myself, adult survivors of child abuse, can just use some of these things and see if they work for us, like coping lists and ways to nurture, how to learn how to love ourselves, how to take care of ourselves. Great info on that website for sure that I've seen on that one in particular, because I have spent quite a bit of time looking around on that website at that self-care information. So I actually did some shows on it, but it's been about a year probably. It's been a long time. So, that website's awesome. Great information. So they're talking about what other factors influence bonding and attachment, and we went through they said any factors that interfere with bonding experiences can interfere with the development of attachment capabilities. When the interactive reciprocal dance between the caregiver and infant is disrupted or difficult, bonding experiences are difficult to maintain. They said that the child's personality or temperament influences bonding. If an infant's difficult to soothe, irritable, or unresponsive compared to a calm, self-soothing child, he or she may or will have more difficulty developing a secure attachment. And the infant's ability to participate in the maternal-infant interaction may be compromised due to a medical condition such as prematurity, birth defect, or illness. And then Bruce D. Perry goes on to talk about the caregivers. As the caregiver's behaviors can impair bonding, critical, rejecting, and interfering parents tend to have children that avoid emotional intimacy, and abusive parents tend to have children that become uncomfortable with intimacy and withdraw. The child's mother may be unresponsive to the child due to maternal depression, substance abuse, overwhelming personal problems, or other factors that interfere with her ability to be consistent and nurturing for the child. They said environment plays a role also. A major impediment to a healthy attachment is fear. If an infant is distressed due to pain, pervasive threat, or a chaotic environment, they will have a difficult time participating in even a supportive caregiving relationship. So they said infants or children in domestic violence, refugee community violence, or war zone environments are vulnerable to developing attachment problems. So they said that the fit between the temperament and the capabilities of the infant and the mother is crucial. Some caregivers can be just fine with a calm infant but are overwhelmed by an irritable infant. And the process of paying attention to reading each other's nonverbal cues and responding appropriately is essential to maintain the bonding experiences that build in healthy attachments. Sometimes a style of communication and response familiar to a mother from one of her or other children may not fit with her current infant, and the mutual frustration of being out of sync can impair bonding. So he goes on to sort of talk about that. He says, how does abuse and neglect influence attachment? There are three primary themes that have been observed in abusive and neglectful families. The most common effect is that maltreated children are essentially rejected, and children that are rejected by their parents will have a host of problems, including difficulty developing emotional intimacy. And in abusive families, it is common for this rejection and abuse to be transgenerational. The neglectful parent was neglected as a child. They pass on the way they were parented. Another theme is parentification of the child, and this takes many forms. One common form is when a young, immature girl becomes a single parent. The infant is treated like a playmate and very early in life like a friend. It is common to hear these young mothers talk about their 4-year-old as my best friend or my little man. In other cases, the adults are so immature and uninformed about children that they treat their children like adults or even like another parent. As a result, their children may participate in fewer activities with other children who are immature. And this false sense of maturity in children often interferes with the development of same-age friendships. And the third common theme is the transgenerational nature of attachment problems, and they pass from generation to generation. That's kind of interesting, I think. It's kind of sad is what it is, but I know looking back, at my situation, that they're talking about the rejection being the biggest issue or one of the biggest issues. And, the neglectful parent was neglected as a child, so then they pass this on. Well, I know that's how, I was talking about that yesterday. My mom was the way that she grew up, in the home with her mother. Her dad, my mom actually talked about her dad in a very loving way. Like my grandfather, I didn't meet my grandfather. He was already passed away before I was born, I think right around the time I was born. And, she said that he used to hide from his wife, so that was my mom's mom. My mom's mom was just abusive to everybody, abusing her husband as well as the children. It wasn't just the kids, right? She was really a violent, abusive woman towards her husband as well as all of her children. So my grandmother was just this horrible woman. So my mom grew up the oldest, the firstborn of this horrible woman, who didn't have the ability to show any love towards my mother. And my mom actually didn't reconcile with my grandmother until after I was born, much later. So I remember my grandmother came to visit us. My mom actually told me that they were working through things, and that my mom was actually finally, forgiving her mother for what she had done to her and the other siblings, and making their lives miserable when she was a young person. So this is the thing, like my mother knew better, but yet she passed on this horrible, abusive cycle of abuse onto her own children, even though she knew that it was wrong, and but she was so stressed out. I mean, she was so frustrated and so miserably unhappy in that marriage with my dad. So the earliest memories I have of my mother are screaming and yelling and shouting and throwing things. My mother was famous for throwing dishes, throwing food, throwing whatever she had in her hands across the room at whoever she was mad at. So whether it was my dad or sibling or myself or whatever. She was just famous for grabbing anything she could get a hold of and hitting whoever she wanted to with it. So like, if my dad was standing nearby and she wanted to get him, whatever she could get a hold of that was really heavy and sturdy, that's what she would pick up and use to bash him in the head with. She did that to her children as well. So that's my recollections of my early life. My mom actually, after I'd say even throughout the years that we lived in the same home there together, which was a long time, she would have periods of calm. She would have periods of, generally it was because she was depressed. So if she was depressed and rather than angry, then there would be like a period of calm, and she would just sit there and feel sorry for herself and drink coffee and hang out and sometimes pass you a $20 bill, or whatever. But if it wasn't that, then it was abusive behavior. And so, this definitely has a huge effect on people. And I know so many people who grew up like that. So I know that I'm, obviously we're not alone. Sad thing is that we're not alone. I really wish that it'd almost be good if you could actually just say that you were just the only one who was ever abused, because then if you were a good person, you'd sit there and say, well, at least no one else has had to go through this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And at least it was just me, and thank God. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you might be feeling kind of like bad about it and say, well, how come it's just me? But I think, most people would agree that it's absolutely horrific that, you wouldn't wish this stuff on anybody. You know what I mean? And, when that bond just doesn't happen, and those attachments don't happen as a child, you have to actually learn how to do this stuff later. And, we didn't get a very important part of our makeup, you know what I mean, that most other people get naturally, because it was just something that they formed these thought patterns, and they were shown this proper way to bond and proper attachments. So it's not something they have to even think about. It just comes naturally. And then, there's so many people like who grew up in these abusive, completely, dysfunctional abusive environments, who have to then learn all this stuff, right? So, it's absolutely horrific. But they say that it is important to note that previously secure attachments can change suddenly following abuse and neglect. The child's perception of a consistent, nurturing world may no longer fit with their reality. For example, a child's positive views of adults may change following physical abuse by a babysitter. And they said, they go on to talk about attachment problems always from abuse. And they said, no, in fact, the majority of attachment problems are likely due to parental ignorance about development rather than abuse. And they said many parents have not been educated about the critical nature of the experiences of the first 3 years of life. And so that's just the thing. It's not always from abuse. It's just the fact that there are lots and lots of people out there who do have children who don't really understand how important it is at these developmental stages, to provide what children need. And so the more public education and policy support for these areas, this will improve. And currently this ignorance is so widespread that it is estimated that 1 in 3 people has an avoidant, ambivalent, or resistant attachment with their caregiver. And despite this insecure attachment, these individuals can form and maintain relationships, yet not with the ease that others can. So that's what they say about that. They said, what specific problems can I expect to see in maltreated children with attachment problems? And they said the specific problems that you may see will vary depending upon the nature, intensity, duration, and timing of the neglect and abuse. And some children will have profound and obvious problems, and some will have very subtle problems that you may not realize are related to early life neglect. and sometimes these children do not appear affected by their experiences. However, it is important to remember why you are working with the children and that they have been exposed to terrible things. There are some clues that experienced clinicians consider when working with these children. Developmental delays is one of them, eating behaviors, soothing behavior, emotional functioning they talk about, inappropriate modeling and aggression. And so we'll just run through those real quickly. But this particular article comes from www.childtrauma.org, and it's from the Child Trauma Academy. That's where I picked this up. But this is just quite interesting to read through here and see what they had to say about bonding and attachment. So they said developmental delays. Children experiencing emotional neglect in early childhood often have developmental delay in other domains. The bond between the young child and caregivers provides the major vehicle for developing physically, emotionally, and cognitively. It is in this primary context that children learn language, social behaviors, and a host of other key behaviors required for healthy development. A lack of consistent and enriched experiences in early childhood can result in delays in motor, language, social, and cognitive development. And eating is another issue. Odd eating behaviors are common, especially in children with severe neglect and attachment problems. They will hoard food, hide food in their rooms, eat as if there will be no more meals, even if they have had years of consistent available food. So they may have to thrive, rumination, throwing up food, swallowing problems, and later in life, odd eating behaviors that are often misdiagnosed as anorexia nervosa. And so that's another thing that people can kind of look at, if you work with children who have been maltreated or neglected. Soothing behavior, this is another one. These children, they said, will use very primitive, immature, and bizarre soothing behaviors. They may bite themselves, headbang, rock, chant, scratch, or cut themselves. And these symptoms will increase during times of distress or threat. And just looking back on the way that I grew up, I know that I had some of those behaviors, the rocking and the chanting and scratching and stuff like this. I had all kinds of nervous problems just because of the abuse that was going on in my home. And there was no comfort. There was 9 of us in the home. There was 7 siblings and 2 my parents, you know what I mean? And because of the environment, it was so violent and so it was so verbally and physically violent. It was just a mess, you know what I mean? There was just no normal behavior in my home. Like, nobody was acting normally. My dad was quite often running around naked or running around trying to kill himself. My mom was threatening to kill herself or somebody else on a regular basis. This was just like life at our home, Or, my parents were either, they were fighting, physically beating on each other, or verbally bashing each other. And so you grow up around that stuff, it can cause a lot of emotional, like, anxiety and a lot of problems. I had all kinds of little things that I would do just to try to help myself. I know that I actually got rid of them, most of them, I'd say the majority of those things that I actually was using. Yes, so just sort of for the soothing behavior or soothing. I guess it was just automatic. It just sort of came on because of the violent and the nature of the home, right? It's just a very sick and twisted environment. And I know one of my siblings actually still a lot of those things that they do. They haven't been able to cut some of them out. But I know myself, it was pointed out to me, some of the things that I was doing, and I really, quite often when I was a kid was made fun of because of it. But later when I got older, I realized, somebody was pointing out a few things that I was doing, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm just doing that out of habit because I've been doing that for so long. And like rocking or whatever people do because of this nervous anxiety stuff. And I mean, I got rid of most of my issues, I would say, but it took a long time to do that. And so many people continue to do that, especially during times of distress or threat. So it's pretty harsh what this stuff does to children, and that's why I'm always trying to promote education, and especially regarding family violence and violence in the home. If there's children present, they will be affected. And that's all there is to it. People think, oh, well, the children aren't being affected. My parents knew what they were doing to us. I mean, they got brought up on charges, so there you go. But it's, many times people have problems within, marital problems and whatnot, and they think that stuff does not affect their children, but it does. It affects everyone around them, right? So it's kind of a selfish issue. People who will not get help for their problems and expect that the children should just be able to survive and thrive in that. And that was my parents. And later on in life, when I would tell my parents, like I was talking about this week, I would tell my parents off when I got older in my 20s because I was like, you can't kill me now. What are you going to do? Because back when I was a kid, I certainly didn't want to. I didn't invite beatings. You know what I mean? Like once in a while, I would say my piece to them and knew that, it was a possibility that could set my mom off and trigger her to rage and beat on me. But most of the time I didn't try to provoke fights with my parents, right? So when I got older, I was like, what are you gonna do now? You know what I mean? You have to listen to me. So I started talking to him and telling him off, and I told him exactly what I felt. I was like, how dare you guys, do what you did to us? You had every opportunity to get help, and you would not get help, and they systematically insisted that it was not their problem. They did the best job they could. They were having such a hard time, and it was everybody else's fault but their own fault. And so many times I think people do that. They bring up children into the world and expect these kids to thrive in these environments that are completely, no one can thrive in that. You can barely survive, right? But to thrive, it's just not going to happen. So I'm very much always trying to promote for, people, if you have children, make sure that you are aware of what you're doing to your children, and that you provide a nice, as stable as it can possibly be, as nurturing as it can possibly be, as loving and safe as it can possibly be for your children, right? Because so many times parents just don't take on that responsibility and expect that children should be able to just thrive in like a war zone. Like our family situation was like a war zone. It was exactly like that. Bombs going off at any time. We're talking tables being thrown across the room, chairs being tossed around the room, furniture busted, dishes breaking. It was just like being in a war zone to a small child, right? And with the physical abuse escalating down to the children, watching my parents beat on each other as well as my siblings, as well as myself, and seeing this and being part of it. A horrible, horrible way for people to grow up, right? So we'll continue on with this tomorrow, and hopefully I'll have better luck getting into my chat room here. Blog Talk Radio has had some serious problems lately, but hopefully, it took me an hour and 10 minutes to get into my show. So tomorrow, hopefully, it'll be a little bit better. Tonight, I'll be back on if I can get in there as well as Dreamcatchers Talk Radio. So have a good day, everybody. If you need some information, get a hold of me here on Blog Talk Radio, Facebook, or whatnot. I'll be around. And, if you need help, you make sure you call a crisis line. You do whatever you have to do, to get that help, right? If you don't have someone to talk to and you're just like, man, I don't know, I just can't cope, you phone a crisis line. You phone somebody, because we are ultimately responsible as adults for our own lives now. You know what I mean? And if we can't do it, then we need to get help. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that's the sad part, is so many people will not get help because out of some sort of fear, or, what do people think of me if I go get help? Or, this and that. And so they allow themselves to spiral downward and completely trash their lives. And that's sad, because that's what I was doing until 4 years ago, when I realized that, hey, I could heal. I can have a good life. I don't have to spend my life letting my past destroy my life, So that's why it's very important for people to realize, two of my brothers, I really wish that they would have stuck around and got themselves some help, because help was available. And they had so many people trying to help them, but they didn't see it themselves. You know what I mean? So people couldn't get through to them, right? They saw no reason to live, and they saw no reason to fight, to hold on, And so, for me, it's just like, no, if I did that, then I let my parents win. My parents would win this fight, and I absolutely refused to let them win this fight. And that's why I was like, no way, they're not winning. If I hurt myself or self-injure or have this horrible life or commit suicide, all it's going to do is allow my parents to win this fight, and they get the upper hand. There's no way I'm winning this fight. I'm going to have a good life, and it's just such a slap in the face to everybody who allowed the abuse to go on. You know what I mean? Because there were people that could have stepped in. There were people that knew what was going on. And there were people that could have stepped in and said, look, you've got to treat your children better. You can't continue to treat your children like that and expect that they're going to grow up and respect you and have a good life. You know what I mean? And shame on them. And you know what? That's right. The shame does not belong to us, right? It belongs to the abusers and to those who would allow the abuse to continue. That's where the shame lies, right? So we deserve to have a good life. So whoever you find out what works for you, whether it's a counselor or a therapist or just calling a crisis line or whatever, and make sure that you do get some help, right? So we'll talk to you real soon. Take care and have a good day, everybody.